All right, everyone. Welcome. I'm Brent Rains for Alternate Perceptions Online Magazine, and it's that time once again to interview another guest. It's Sunday evening, the 18th of September, and my very special guest is C.J. Robinson, PhD licensed clinical psychologist in private practice over in the Knoxville, Tennessee area. And he suggested that he begin telling first a little bit about his professional background, and then we will delve into why he's interested in anomalous things that we usually discuss. So, anyway, welcome to our broadcast, Dr. Robinson.
Thank you so much, Brent. I really appreciate it. Thanks for the welcome. So, yeah, as I was kind of saying before, we kicked things off and started recording. I'm not selling anything. I don't have a polished website that, kind of talks about both these different sides of my work or who I am. Um, so, uh, this is just me being the most honest. Um, you know, reasonable human being that I can, who says that, yeah, I have a professional identity, that I've worked very hard to develop and curate. And then also, I'm a human being who's had experiences that are anomalous, and I'm not able to easily explain those. Certainly, there's been a
Okay.
lot of, recent talk and research that has me very excited, not just for my own curiosities, but I mean, there are folks who come into my practice every day, who are having anomalous experiences or events that they're really curious about. And so I just try to say, well, um, let's look at the science and let's look at, what this event means to you, and we go from there and see if we can maybe find the healing along the way. Um, so all that said, um, I as you said, I'm a licensed clinical psychologist. I've been working in private practice since 2013. And as a clinical psychologist, that means I kind of do a little bit of everything. So, psychological testing, psychotherapy, with individuals, couples, families. Um, I do a fair amount of, evaluation for different agencies like police, um, first responders, um, just just different folks and different agencies who need you know, clinical psychologist. Um, so that's me. Um, I'll not go into all the degrees and all that. I don't find that very interesting. Um, been there, done that. In regard to being an experiencer, I never really thought much about this stuff um, until maybe 2017 or so. Let's see, so I'm 47 now. So yeah, I was in my early 40s, and I guess the to paraphrase Jung, that's when I started living. Was when I hit
Ah.
midlife and said, okay, what are the things I haven't addressed in my life that I kind of need to look at or work on. And one of them was this side of me that I always thought was just some kind of blip, on the radar of life and really not worth all that much attention. But anyway, here's the story. Um, when I was about, I think I spoke with my mom, and it was about age somewhere between 4 to 6. So I was fairly young.
Mhm.
Um, I'm from Eastern Kentucky,
Mm.
pretty poor area of Appalachia, and you know, during the holidays, we often would go to some elder's house, and everybody just kind of piles up, you know, spends the couple nights there, does the Christmas tree thing, all that. Well, one year, I was about 4, 5, 6, somewhere around there. We were staying at my grandparents' trailer, which oddly enough, for those of your fans who like Hellier, it's maybe 20 minutes from Hellier, where this place is. So, yeah, I don't know that much about the Hellier goblin phenomenon, but yeah. Um, so anyway, I remember being asleep, and my mom was holding me, And it was my mother, my father, and I in the bedroom spending the night. And all of a sudden, like there's this silver white light, very soft, that kind of just slowly, like something coming down the hallway, like someone was holding a lantern and just slowly walking down the hallway. And for whatever reason, it woke me up. Not very bright. And the door opens, and my parents never moved. They, stayed stock still in the bed, peacefully sleeping. But I remember waking up and kind of opening my eyes and peeking because I thought it was Santa Claus. I was like, wait a minute, I don't want to get in trouble for looking what I'm not supposed to. Um, and there, what I perceived was a very tall being, maybe, I don't know, 6.5, 7 feet tall, very, very tall, very slender, wearing like this like silvery mesh kind of outfit. And next thing I know, I closed my eyes because it scared me. I didn't know who this was or what this was. But I remember being lifted up and taken to the living room, where all the rest of my immediate family was, and everyone was asleep, but I wasn't asleep. And there are these tall beings, kind of like the prototypical Greys, but instead of being really short, they're rather tall. And I remember like peeking around, trying to just make sense of what is this? Is this a dream? Is this I don't understand. And one by one, the beings, there were 2 or 3 maybe, but they all looked alike. I couldn't differentiate by any means that I was aware of. But they would take my family members outside, and after a few moments, bring them back in and put them back in the room they had been sleeping in. Well, when it came my turn, one of the beings very gently picked me up and took me outside down the steps. And I remember the steps to the trailer, it had, 4 steps. So it was 1, 2, 3, and I don't remember the 4th step. I just remember there being like a really bright light. And the next morning I woke up and I'm talking to my mom and I'm saying, Mom, who are those people who came and they took you and they took Dad and they took me, and what did you see? Did you see the light? And my mom was like, what the hell are you talking about, son? I mean, it kind of panicked her. She was wondering, what are you talking about? This isn't real. This is real. So at some point, I guess I stopped blathering about it and found something more interesting, like, I don't know, Tonka toys or, whatever. And I remember years later asking my mom, and it was something about just sort of discussing what I was like as a child. And she said, CJ, you've always been, very kind. You've always wanted to pull everybody together and, talk to everybody and just everyone get along. And you'd always get real excited, when people came over. And she said, but the oddest thing about you, she said, and it kind of worried me. At one point, I took you to see a doctor because you would come up with these crazy stories about seeing things or experiencing, things that never happened. And I'm like, really? Well, can you give me an example? And one of the key examples she brought up was this event from my childhood. Now, I'll be the first to say I have zero proof or evidence that this happened. I can't say that it did happen. I can't say that it did not. What I can say is that, I have this memory, and more importantly, this set of meaning for me, that the event felt real, and that at middle age, it all just kind of came roaring up, and saying, "Hey, pay attention to me."
Well, that's interesting. I know. I know you also mentioned in an earlier accounting of it that they had like big oval eyes, and were they kind of the dark eyes that a lot of people describe, or Did they have a color to them, or?
No, they had large bulbous heads, almost like light bulb shaped heads.
Ah,
Yeah,
okay.
and they had, these large black uh, eyes with no sclera, no whites. Um,
Hmm.
but the thing that was the weirdest for me is that they had like all of the, I guess the clothing, if you call it that, was very skin tight and held close to the body. But they had sort of like a weird, like maybe 2 or 3 inch high, almost like a collar, to kind of support or protect the back of the neck, maybe. Um,
Hmm.
but it just looked like this stiff fabric. Um, and Interestingly, in looking at other accounts of what experiencers have experienced, I've yet to come across a similar description. Usually it's just tight clad clothing or whatever, some sort of mesh material that doesn't really um, tell you what kind of fabric it is. So, but no embellishments. Um, so the
Yeah.
collar has always interested me for some reason.
Hmm. Um, when it, you said when it was coming down the hall, there was a little illumination. And so when it actually the being was in your presence, was there an illumination then, or?
Hmm. Yeah, it was like they were backlit by a soft silver light. It was a very, like I said, just very soft. Um, and you know, I don't recall seeing anything like a flashlight or any sort of a device.
Yeah.
It was almost like they gave off their own light, if that makes sense.
Hmm. Well, I've heard of that in some cases, and sometimes they'll have a some of the beings reportedly like the collar you described. They'll have a it comes out on the sides. It's kind of a you know um,
Cool. You'll have
usually,
to, yeah, share those with me.
usually like if they're wearing some type of robe or something, and they've got a big collar like thing. Um, but that's interesting. So and so your mother said there were other things, but I guess you probably kind of forgot those. That was the one that stood out the most. So what can you tell what town that was in that occurred?
It was in Shelbyana, Kentucky,
Oh, okay.
in that general area. Yeah. So it's a small place in Pike County, Kentucky. That's um, like I said, it's maybe 20 minutes drive from Hellier. So
Wow.
uh, when I recently heard about Hellier, I thought, oh, okay. And I've not seen the series, so I'm like, nope, I don't want to watch anything that might put any thoughts in my head. I've got enough high strangeness
Yeah.
without trying to add analytical overlay or something you know onto something that who knows what it was.
Yeah. Well, now since then, I know of course, I had become aware of you when you had written a little account of this, and there were some people like in the exchanges online, Facebook, the Contact and Consciousness Research Institute with Ray Hernandez and other researchers, and I have had some involvement, with the group also. Back when they were free, the Foundation for Research and Extraterrestrial Extraordinary Experiences, which was a 5-year study, and then they've moved on to the CCRI. But I know you had described this, and then people were asking you questions, and as you mentioned earlier when you were talking about your professional career as a psychologist, people coming up to you privately telling you things that were happening. And I remember you had revealed about someone who you were seeing who seemed to be quite gifted psychically with intuitions and such. And I wondered if maybe you might be able to share that without. In fact, I remember you said that you had like a small intuitive uh, voice, sort of that you felt may have been related to your experience from back around age 5. And so the psychic element is, of course, something that, free CCRI, other researchers have been exploring, quite a bit. How it seems like when someone has one of these being encounters, craft encounters, a lot of times they develop more psychic ability or awareness than the average person seems to possess.
Yeah.
So thought we might touch upon that, and anything you'd care to share from your own experience or thoughts
Sure.
on the
Yeah.
subject.
What I have noticed, and first off, I have tremendous respect for people like Ray Hernandez, and all the folks doing, the research and, putting themselves out on the line every day, professionally, personally, at tremendous cost to get the truth out there, I think. So that includes IONS and, the Monroe Institute. I've had some interactions with both of those organizations, and including I've read the first book, that Ray's put out, his group. And what I have found, both as a clinician and as an experiencer, is that for whatever reason, these experiences innately are traumatic, right? So, it's this sense that, wow, my world has changed, or my paradigm has shifted so far, from what I was raised with or what I, tend to believe. Or maybe sometimes the events in and of themselves are scary. Like Travis Walton. I mean, his was really super traumatic. But with that common element of trauma, what I've noticed is that we know that trauma changes the brain. It creates different pathways in the brain, strengthening some, weakening others, and there's this whole sense that, this suspicion that I've been reading about, that when people have these experiences and they experience this ontological trauma, the world changing around them and the sand shifting so rapidly, it creates these changes in the brain. And maybe that's how, physiologically speaking, folks are able to have these abilities or to have these experiences later. I never thought I had an intuitive gift until in recent years I was asked to provide a psychic reading, basically, with this one organization that I'm a part of, and I said, well, I don't know tarot cards or any of that stuff. I'm not that kind of guy. I'm a clinical psychologist. I like science. But to help out, I said, sure, whatever. This person sat down and said, so what is it that you do? Do you have cards? Do you do a pendulum and all this other stuff? And I said, lady, I'm just here. So, and it was like this intuitive voice said, ask if you can gently hold their hands, get still and quiet for a minute, and just report on what you see. And I thought, wow, that's odd, but I did it. And that's where I learned, that I'm able to, if I'm in the right headspace, just see stuff and tell people stuff, past, present, future. And so that led me to, remote viewing, and that led me to Monroe Institute and now IONS. And so I feel like I'm playing so much catch up, and there's so much I need to learn. And along the way, I have to be careful and avoid the monetizers out there and the people who are just writing really, really, really off the wall stuff, but with very little backing. So I guess that's the gift of my professional side, is that I can kind of separate the wheat from the chaff.
Yeah, I remember I was investigating. I'm from Maine originally, and I was investigating a group of people who lived out in a wooded area, and they were claiming they had seen what they thought was Bigfoot. And I went to investigate, and then they talked about having ghosts, and then there were strange lights. And I had just read a book on psychometry, so I had tried it out on them and some other people, and Anyway, the people were telling me, "Hey, you're picking up some stuff. I relate, which surprised me. And I know there was one house I went to that these two ladies wanted to do a seance, and I've been going around investigating haunted houses up in Maine. This is back in the 70s, and I said, okay, sure, I know the basic routine. And so we went to this woman's house who deals with antiques, and we were upstairs on the second floor in this room with a table, and we sat around, and I think we had a little candle in the middle, and we ended up just sort of staring around the room and looking at each other, and nothing was happening. So I said, look, I've been reading this book about psychometry, so let me, usually I hold an object, but let me just see if I can look around and get impressions. So I remember there were two paintings in the room, and I said, okay, this is from like France. Uh-huh. And I said, oh, really? Okay. I said, the year is, and I came up with the year that was painted. Uh-huh. And I said, oh, come on now, come on. Not really. Oh, yeah, yeah, really. So, of course, I had no way of knowing.
Hmm.
But she was saying that I was right, and she seemed quite sincere. And my cousin, who had me come there and do this with her because she was interested, seemed to trust her and all. So anyway, with this group down that I said was in the wooded area having all these experiences, one evening I'm down there, and this woman says she sees like a gypsy woman's head in the middle of this kitchen table. I don't see anything, but okay, we're going with psychic impressions. So I says something like, I think it was 15 minutes after 11. I says, I'm going to go out here in this field. We'll come out of the woods and we'll see a UFO. I'm testing myself at this point. If I'm this
Uh-huh.
good, I want to see something. So two people followed me out, a man and a woman, and we get out there, and a bright column of light rises up from behind the trees,
Oh, wow.
and it goes up a little ways and stops, and it's kind of pulsating like, and then it goes up a little higher, stops, eventually it reaches the cloud, this low cloud cover. Later on, it rained, and then it slowly retracts and went down behind the trees. And I said, it's not exactly what I wanted to see as a UFO, but that was weird.
Hmm.
And and then it did it again, and then it did it in another direction. So, I thought, wow. And then one night, I was getting quite a reputation with these people, and we saw this light coming up over the trees, and this woman was there that night with the beam of light. She started freaking out, because it really was, it was low on the horizon. It really looked like something, looked like it was flickering all these colors. I was
Oh,
kind of
wow.
impressed too. And anyway, she says, Brett, what have you done? What have you brought down upon us? Fortunately, it turned out it was just a planetary body, and it was, maybe Venus or something. It was, and of course, right on the horizon is when they can appear their most spectacular. So we were that one I had an explanation for. But later on, the guy that was there, who was her brother, was visiting my parents' house, and we're standing out in the driveway, and he says, "Boy, if you told this other woman down that lived in this cabin in the woods, if you said that you were Jesus Christ at this point, she would probably believe you." And I said, I can't just go like this, pointing and make something happen. And just as I went like this, there was a bright flash of light in the direction I was pointing.
Oh, wow.
So we got in a car and we drove over to where this flash of light had come. It was on a nearby hill. And I says, okay, see, Charlie, it was just a tree limb, and it, fell down, and it, you know, um, cut this power line.
Hmm.
And at that point, Charlie says, "Yeah, but Brent, you're missing the point. Why did it do just as you pointed in that direction at that very instant, and you were trying to deny you had any kind of ability?"
Yep.
So, but then one day there was somebody that I had done a reading for, and I totally blew it. So at that point, I said, "Okay, I'm done with this. I ain't going to hang out my psychic shingle. I'm going to stick with science and research." Uh, but there have been things since then that I've gradually come to realize, yeah, there's something going on. There's these synchronicities
Hmm.
and sometimes dreams that you just can't, especially when it's like a precognitive thing. you just can't turn your back to it. These things do happen, and I know journalist John Keel. He wrote, of course, the most popular book was the Mothman Prophecies, and he talked about how many times uh, witnesses and researchers, as you get deep into this, the phenomena can turn reflective, and you can have these very outstanding synchronicities and even other things, poltergeist activity might erupt in your home or something. And but like you said, there was a woman I met who was a researcher herself, and she got in the field because she had a close encounter with a family of a disc-shaped domed object down in Florida near a military base. And within 3 or 4 days afterwards, poltergeist activity erupted in her home, voices, footsteps, strange smells. And then after a few weeks, these apparitions of beings inside the bedroom at night, always around 3 o'clock in the morning. And she told me, she says, now, Brent, the thing I saw, she says, it looked like a solid metallic craft. But this other stuff, the psychic stuff, she says, I'm not saying for sure that it's related. Sort of like she was going on like what you said, that the experience was so unusual, so traumatic type, that it may have resulted in this opening her up, and also her 13-year-old son began to have experiences too, with balls of light and dark figures, shadowy figures in his bedroom at night, where he would come into her room saying he was scared. So, there's a whole complex thing. A part of it, I would say, is an intelligence, and then we have to look at the other part that could be us that projects certain things too. And it's, and unfortunately, there's not enough people who have really wanted to bring all these different components together and look at it seriously. It's I thought back in the 1970s that we were headed where we seem to be headed now. So I don't know how long it'll last, because it seems like we make a few steps forward and then we get pulled back. It's kind of a back and forth thing. But I've been in January. I've been in the UFO field for 56 years.
Wow.
And I kind of feel sometimes like I've been spinning my wheels,
Mm-hmm.
But it's just so fascinating because it embodies so many areas. And if we could just bring everybody together, the cryptozoologists, to look at our data, the parapsychologists or the ghost hunters, I mean, all these different fields, instead of pigeonholing and the data in their own specialized field, kind of come together and say, okay, let's agree to compare notes and see what similarities, see if we can connect any dots, But anyway.
No, that's a very that is a good wish. Good hope.
I've been told I was pipe dreaming.
Well, but in thinking today, as I was traveling, I was actually visiting family back home in Kentucky, and so I had a lot of time on the road today to travel back. And I thought about this interview, and I was like, what's the most interesting or helpful thing maybe that I can say, if someone has, thoughts about me or my work or my perspective. And what just kind of came to me was this sense of frustration that, for me as a licensed professional to come and say, well, I'm not sure what this is. I am no guru. I'm no expert. But when I have consistently people both in my personal and professional life, who are saying, well, hey, what does it mean when you have these kinds of experiences? Mm-hmm. And not just, the cryptids, not just the UFO stuff, but just the spiritual questions, the mystical questions, the self-improvement, growth, what does the synchronicity mean questions. And And what I came away with was, there's this fear that if we just even have the conversation, that somehow we're going to be seen as less than or crazy, or if you're a licensed professional, you're incompetent, or somehow wasting a person's time. um, and certainly I don't start with this stuff, you know in my regular work. Absolutely not. I start with what I've been trained to do and what my
Hmm.
license says I should do, and ethically that's where I start. um, and most of the time that gets an answer that's satisfactory, and the person's able to move on, but not always. Why is it that we have such a high percentage of people who are actively depressed, anxious, feeling miserable? I mean, we've had all these years of medication and therapy and all these ideas about how to help folks, but we're still suffering. I think that's because, you know, in, in the effort to follow the science and to be empirical and to try to be like the other, healing modalities, like surgery or cardiology or whatever, we we have thrown away some of the best parts of what it means to be a human being, and to work with another human being. And that's the mystery. That's the wonderment. The saying, well, gee, I don't know what this is, but what does it mean to you?
Hmm.
And so we've stopped making meaning, and we just want to reduce everything to, okay, you're depressed because you have these 7 symptoms, and so if we get these symptoms to be less problematic, well, you're not going to be depressed anymore. But that's often, so often, not the case. And I've been doing this work in one form or another for about 20 years. So that's what came to me in thinking about this interview was, anytime there's something that we can't talk about, that's no, hush, taboo, don't go there. Well, um, smarter folks than me, Freud, Jung, Fritz Perls, um, John Mack, I mean, they said, well, that's where you need to kind of persist and look and see what's there. And sometimes, yeah, a cigar is just a cigar. It's, a traumatic experience. You treat the trauma, help the person change, make meaning. But if you don't at least have the conversation and you don't open yourself up to it, well, in many ways, I think that we're causing more harm than good.
Yeah, that's that's a good point. Carl Jung was certainly quite a quite an interesting pioneer. He certainly was a disappointment to Sigmund Freud, who wanted him to follow in his footsteps. But I mean, he had his last book that he really put together was on the UFO phenomenon. He thought it was really that significant, and not too long before he passed, and he offered the thought that there was, because he was big into synchronicity, meaningful coincidence, that there's something there you can't connect it causally, but this X factor that connects things between consciousness and physics that we haven't really
Yeah.
nailed down. But he was interested in quantum physics and the psychic elements, and he himself was um, had some pretty unusual experiences over his lifetime. And I remember one that's in his UFO book about he's at a seance type setting, and there's a psychic medium who these four guys are looking at, and they're seeing this moon shaped orb over the guy's abdomen. And they're excitedly pointing it out to Carl Jung, and he's saying, "Well, I don't see it." And they can't believe it. There's four of them that can see it. Jung can't. What's wrong with you, Jung? But he called it psychoid.
Mhm.
And it's kind of like synchronicity, but in a visual type form. And I've been making a point to document as many similar cases as I can, because uh, I thought, man, that's this more going on than meets the eye with this stuff. And I was even someone brought to my attention something he had written, and I looked it up, where he was in Ravenna, Italy, one time with a colleague. He'd been to this ancient church site or whatever there that goes back to Roman times. And he remembered spending quite a bit of time, and his colleague remembered, this lady colleague remembered being there too. And they were looking at these glass renderings with all these designs from the New Testament of Jesus being baptized, walking on water, and he's I think in one time he's like 20 minutes just commenting to this person all the implications of what they're seeing in one of these glass panes. Well, he didn't have time to get any pictures or anything, so he wanted to. He had a friend who was going there and said, "Go ahead and get some images for me." His friend went and learned that no such place existed.
Wow.
And his Young's colleague, colleague, could not believe that it wasn't physically there, but they had tried, and there was no evidence that this may have been something that existed at one time. All he could remember was there was an unusual illumination of bluish light while they were in this room. And, you know, uh, Young had a near-death experience, a heart attack, as I recall, where he saw himself above the earth floating for a spell, So, and he was very interested in, I think he went out to the Southwest and interviewed an Indian medicine man. And he was really, when he could, a boots on the ground kind of guy,
Mm-hmm.
But he read extensively on all kinds of things that most people ignore on religious things, shamanism or whatever. And I remember watching a YouTube video that someone from the CCRI group had posted, and it was Young talking about a British woman who had all the symptoms of a Kundalini experience, except this woman was British. She had no idea that culture and that kind of belief, background.
Wow.
So yeah, he was, and of course his ideas, the archetypes of the collective unconscious, and
Mm-hmm.
the mandala being the symbol of wholeness, and of course he said, yeah, and flying saucers. Maybe maybe there's this psychic connection. But anyway, um, in the end, though, as my friend Dr. Greg Little likes to say, Young said that something is seen, we know not what. So we're still at that, still at that point.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, and that's, you know, often where I land with stuff. Um, I'll have folks that I'm talking to or working with, and they'll ask me, well, what do you think this means? And I say, I am very much agnostic here. Okay. I rely on people who have been studying this, like yourself, for years and years, and who have put in the work and done the reading and who really are just well versed. Um, and and I think that maybe, Brent, that's one of the really great things about this current iteration of, I don't know, disclosure, confirmation, whatever they're calling it, about the phenomena is, we now have the Ray Hernandezes, the Diana Pasulkas, the the Dean Radins. I mean, we've got these really, really bright folks who are looking at this from a way that's from perspective that's not so micro, but more macro, and saying, well, we're not sure what this means, but this is what we're seeing.
Right.
So likewise, in my discussions, I tell folks, look, I don't have an answer for you. My answer is not that important. This is about your answer. But here are the folks that I think are reasonable, academics, people in the private sector that you can maybe talk to or contact, and just see, what develops. And once you put someone on that path, the cool thing is that, one, the stigma's gone, and so all these anxieties and all this ontological trauma about, am I crazy? Is someone not going to believe me? All that stuff goes away, right? And then the individual is able to make their own meaning and work through this And then they come back and they tell me, hey, thanks for, putting me on the track of this book or this particular researcher or whatever. I had a wonderful conversation or an email or whatever, and things started to click and make sense. And that's how people get better. That's how people, when people feel believed and honored, and their stories not, just dismissed outright. Um, that's how healing happens, and that's what I'm interested in. I mean, I don't know if Bigfoot's real. I don't know if aliens are real. I mean, I've had experiences and things that I can't explain. Um, and so for me, what is real is that experience for me personally, or when I'm working with another human being and they have questions or anxieties and, trying to make them in. That's what's important to me.
Yeah. I've struggled with the idea of reincarnation, and yet I've read and heard, from people, like the late Dr. Ali O'Sprinkle, who was a Wyoming psychologist, and he used to do regressions of people in the past lives. And he and someone else I read who had worked with past life hypnotic regressions claimed that their that their finding was that the sounds like we got a dog in the background.
Sorry, yeah.
No
yeah,
problem.
The plot hound is, if we could edit that out.
It's no
Sorry,
problem.
Jarvis, we love you.
It's a wonder one of my cats hasn't showed up. But anyway, uh, well, that's because I got the doors all closed. Anyway, yeah, they were citing some statistics showing that the general psychotherapy that was used to help people through certain states of depression took longer than, say, a past life regression, where they suddenly realized that their phobia or something was related to, whether real or imagined, they almost drowned once or something, and now they understand why they have this phobia, and suddenly they go on with their life like nothing happened.
Yeah, yeah,
But it's just interesting. It's there's something to it, but we're still on the journey to try and figure it out, and you know maybe we will, maybe we won't.
yeah. Well, and Lord knows along the way, over the past 5, 6 years that I've been reading about this stuff and just trying to figure out, what's going on. I've tried to avoid this. I mean, I'm like, no, 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 no. Let's leave aliens in the realm of science fiction and watching, Star Trek, because I am a Trekkie. But but let's leave that stuff there, because I don't have answers. I don't have, definitive
Mhm.
proof or, whatever. And the more I try to get away from it, it's almost like, as Young would say, well, you're in that age, CJ, where you're going to have to start dealing with, this stuff, and retilling that old soil and planting something very useful for your next stage of development. So it just keeps coming up, um, and I don't know. I was telling a former patient of mine today who reached out to me and just wanted to check, be like, "Hey, how you doing, doc? What's going on?" And I'm like, "Oh, I'm good. How are you? Thanks for checking in." And he said, "Doc, why do therapists get such a bad rap?" And I'm like, "Well, that's really interesting. What do you mean?" Well, this guy, he's really bright. He said, if you pick a movie that has a therapist in it, that therapist is going to be someone who is like the serial killer, or they know the serial killer and didn't figure it out, or they're somehow bad, or they've done something awful, or they're horribly incompetent. And I got to thinking, I was like, well, now wait a minute, that's not true. And then I started thinking about some recent movies that I've seen, and I'll often joke like, yep, it's the therapist who did it. And I think we have this frustration, maybe at an unconscious level in society, that says therapy is bad or therapists are bad, because at one point in our species development, we were healers and shamans and path walkers, and light worker, whatever the term is. But
Mhm.
medicine meant all these different archetypal, powerful images, and over the span of a couple hundred years, we've been watered down, to this these caricatures almost. Well, come in, you know, check these boxes. If you hit so many boxes and your insurance says you have a mental health issue, then your suffering is valid enough to meet with you for an average of 26 visits, and by then, if you're better, great. I did a wonderful job. But if you're not better by 26 visits, well, you're a resistant patient, or we need to add medication on there because you're somehow, too hurt or too broken or too, controversial. And so the more he and I talked about that, I thought, maybe there's a genuine, legitimate beef about mental health. And part of that, at least part of it, I think, is that there has been this active, sometimes violent reaction against, therapy that is holistic, that, looks at the entire person and their experience. Um, I mean, even now, if I said, hey, you've got 5 minutes to book a session with a Gestalt therapist, someone who looks at, or a Jungian analyst,
Mhm.
okay? You've got 5 minutes. You'll win $1 million if you can, get that booked. Wouldn't happen. Wouldn't happen.
Mm.
You would need a lot more than just 5 minutes or an hour or even a day. But if I said, hey, you'll win $1 million if you can book a session with someone who just looks at your thoughts, just your behaviors, just what you're thinking, your cognitions, uh, they're all over the place. And that's largely because, there's this societal impetus over the years to make therapy and meaning making very watered down and very much not receptive to, what it means to sit with someone and manage more than just symptoms. And I think that's part of what's going on with the whole phenomenon too. So that's why I have so much respect for folks like yourself who are saying, well, I don't have the answers, but man, let's try to get everybody under the same, you know, big top umbrella and talk about it.
I know that I've mentioned to a number of people, friends of mine who are in the mental health field, looking into UFOs and paranormal phenomena as well. And I've had the reaction a number of times of people saying, well, those psychologists or those psychiatrists, they're strange people anyway. And I thought, that's an interesting reaction, Um, maybe, maybe this is kind of a defense mechanism here. You know,
Mm-hmm.
um, obviously they're a little skeptical of the subject matter anyway, and so I present someone who's really educated, looking at it, academic, and it doesn't matter who it is. They're liable to come back with a similar answer, but um, if it was a physicist, it'd be the same thing. How does he know? Has he been up there and checked it all out?
Right,
Um, and,
right.
and and it seems like these days people are more cynical and skeptical and about everything. Just look at politics and religion right now.
Oh gosh, I'd rather not.
Amen, amen. It's
um,
crazy.
yeah,
Uh,
yeah, and so along those lines, there was here in um, recent months, I was in contact with someone who, who's, we'll say they're a researcher, pretty prominent, very well respected, very bright, um, and as a psychologist and also to my temperament, I try to meet people in a place of wonder and excitement about what they're doing or what's important to them, and just being
mhm,
naturally curious about and supportive of what they're naturally curious about and giving their life's time and breath to. And so I said something very, what I thought was very reasonable and kind in this email, saying, "Well, thank you so much. I really appreciate the opportunity to get your thoughts on this. I consider myself lucky, to have this moment with you. Just me being me."
Hmm.
Well, this individual responded almost violently, like, "Whoa, what is this? Some sort of weird hero worship thing or whatever?" And they
Hmm.
were not unkind, but it was just this very strange, negative, strong reaction. And I think
Yeah.
that's the other thing that's going on here is that um, this field eats its young in many ways. So if someone comes in and says, "Well, gee, I had this experience," or "I'm, really curious about this," or "Hey, I read your book and I really, really enjoyed it, and thank you so much, and can we talk about it?" It's almost like there's this sort of paranoid fear that comes up and says, "Well, wait a minute, are you trying to make me look stupid? Are you trying to somehow, harm my work or harm, you know, um, my credibility, my finances, my family, whatever?" Um, and so, luckily, in this situation, um, there was an intermediary third party, you know, and I just
Yeah.
sort of reached out and said, "Look, I am so sorry. I'm not sure what I did wrong. Um, I respect this individual. I didn't mean any sort of offense." And the person basically said, "Look, it's not you. It's a situation that they're just kind of going through." And so, Brent, why is there such cynicism and you know such vehemence that society is putting toward the researchers and toward people who just want to be curious and just try to say, "Well, what does this mean?" To the point that
Hmm.
people get stressed and under duress, they feel attacked. Probably because there are a lot of folks out there saying, "Hey," you know, but
Yeah. Yeah. It's a lot of people are kind of really messed up right now. I mean, I've always had a lot of respect for the field of journalism, but that's another field right now. I see. Well, they're associated with this newspaper or this agency. They're in on it. Like what? you know, it's and there's a lot of emotional attacks and things that's not really being thought out. There's a loss of any depth of objectivity and a lot of issues. It's more emotional, and you know, I hope that you know we'll get by this period we're in right now. That's all I'll say. But
oh yeah, me too. Me too. I
uh,
just wish we could all be a bit kinder to one another. Um,
yeah, that's the key.
mm,
But well, anyway, I see we're creeping up on an hour.
that went quick. Oh my gosh. I hope there was something here useful or interesting for your readers.
We don't call ourselves alternate perceptions for nothing. They should be used to exploring all these different issues, psychological, parapsychological, theoretical, and not a real answer, but we're kicking it around. And so I really appreciate, if I call you CJ,
Please.
um, you know, that you took this time to talk with me, and we both kind of kicked it around the best we could,
Yeah.
and I think gradually as we do that, that helps other people that are at the point where we're at, trying to be honest with themselves and the nature of the phenomena and the nature of this kind of work we do, and the struggle and challenges that are involved. And maybe we've said something that might help them out with their struggles. But anyway, is there anything final that maybe something you want to tell about that we hadn't touched upon, or before we sign off?
Um, No, I would just encourage folks to continue being curious and to continue listening to one another. I think we need so much more of that um, now more than ever. And it's okay to say I don't know.
All righty. Well, I just, it's it's an intriguing field. Even, we just don't really understand it, but I think it's important that we try.
Yep.
That's all I can say. It's got a lot of there's some underlying reality. There's too many things that seem to happen. We can't explain, and we got to keep knocking on the door. So
Well,
anyway,
well, thank you so much for letting me come in, sit down, have a cuppa with you, and just kind of noodle this stuff together. I appreciate it.
well, I thank you, CJ, and maybe we can do this again sometime. But anyway, it's good to finally talk face to face and talk these
Likewise.
things over with you. I certainly appreciate it. You take care.